Welcome to Critical Thinking on Gay TV on the Go. I'm your host, Waymon Hudson, and each episode we'll be bringing you in-depth discussions with newsmakers and opinion shapers on all things political in the LGBT community. On this edition, we'll be discussing one of the most pervasive and damaging arguments used against LGBT equality for decades, the Save Our Children myth. This political and legal argument used by anti-equality foes says that gays are harmful to children in a variety of horrendous and long debunked ways. After the break, I sit down with Law Professor Anthony Niedwiecki, who teaches law and sexual orientation at the John Marshall Law School, to discuss this false narrative. Professor Niedwiecki has written extensively about this long-debunked Save Our Children argument, from its historical roots to its use in political campaigns to its current place in cases being heard by the Supreme Court. But first, as a community still struggling for equality, it is important to always check in to see what our opponents are saying, even as momentum continues to move our way. In doing so, we can shine a light on these dispatches from the wrong side of history. In this segment, we take a quick look at televangelist Pat Robertson as he recently weighed in on the possible lifting of the Boy Scouts ban on openly gay scouts and leaders. Using his platform from the Christian Broadcasting Network, Robertson claimed that if scouts lift the ban on gays, we will see predators as Boy Scouts, pedophiles who will come in as scoutmasters. Leave it to Pat Robertson to so perfectly embody the anti-equality voice from the wrong side of history on this episode's topic so perfectly.
The level of luxury that Hotel Blackhawk offers does not stop in the entrance, lobby, or signature restaurant. Every guest is greeted with posh accommodations as they enter their room. While the rooms all have different layouts, all are stunning and beautifully designed. Many of the guest rooms resemble the 2-bed, 2-bath residential suites, which include large showers and a jacuzzi tub, office areas, large kitchens, washer and dryer in unit, and private patios with beautiful views.
The hotel also features a full-service spa, Spa Luce. They have a full fitness center, and a pool with an outdoor deck. And for a fun evening of entertainment and martinis, make sure you don't miss Black Hawk Bowling and Martini Lounge.
Professor Niedwiecki, thank you so much for joining us here on Critical Thinking. This is a really timely and important topic, the Save Our Children argument, and kind of where it's going and where it came from. It's happening all the time right now in our movement in court cases and in the debate over, open scouting and open service in the military. So why don't you give us a little bit of history about kind of where it started?
Sure. In the late 70s, there were some political campaigns initiatives to overturn anti-discrimination ordinances that were in different cities. Anita Bryant, who was a beauty queen back then, overturned the first one with a campaign that was based on Save Our Children, with the idea that children were in danger of being harmed by gay people.
So she used this argument that gay people were dangerous to kids through both recruiting them and in just predatory ways and molestation. And it was a really effective argument because at that time, that was the only argument that people heard. In the 70s, gay people weren't that visible. So all they heard on the nightly news was this one side of the argument.
Exactly, and that's what came to define gay people at the time. And it was, again, very successful. They won, and then they moved on very quickly to put in a gay adoption ban in Florida, and then went all over the country to overturn anti-discrimination ordinances everywhere. And they even went into California and pushed what was called the Briggs Amendment, which would have banned gay teachers from working in the public schools.
And so that idea that gay people were harmful to kids, it really got cemented into the American psyche. And as we move forward through the 70s and into the 80s and 90s, it actually came to play a larger role into other issues, not just in anti-discrimination policies.
Yeah, we saw with the debate of the Boy Scouts back in the 80s and 90s, that was definitely a focal point of keeping gay people out of the Boy Scouts, that they were going to be harmful to children, that they were going to molest children, or that they liked children. So you didn't want to have gay people be scoutmasters in overnight camp with kids.
So it became so effective in all of these arguments throughout the 80s and 90s that we saw it move into the political realm. in the 90s and late 2000s. How did that really come into play when it came to like marriage equality, when it started to move through?
Yeah, and when marriage first became an idea on the national stage because of Hawaii and other states, that the courts actually found that marriage was a constitutional right. You saw initiatives all over the country being pushed to ban marriage between same-sex couples. And in that was always an argument that gay people were harmful to children, but maybe in a little bit more subtle way, by saying that same-sex parents aren't equal to opposite-sex parents, or every kid needs to have a mom and a dad. It's always in the best interest of the child, always playing off of that basic narrative that gay people were harmful to children.
Exactly. We saw that become very, very effective throughout multiple campaigns across the states. And it kind of, I think, culminated and came to a head in a recent case, in the Prop 8 case.
Yeah, I think the Prop 8 case gave you a perfect example of the difference between how courts deal with these issues and how politically you deal with these issues. Politically, in the initiative, Prop 8, the campaign pushing Prop 8 at the time, they used this great, for them, and very effective ad where it was basically saying that schools are going to indoctrinate children about gay families, and that they're going to learn and maybe even change them gay, in a sense, was what was implicit in this ad. Before this ad came out, Prop 8 was going to fail, according to the polls, by a few points. And then once this ad was played widely all over the state, you saw almost a 10-point turnaround to where now Prop 8 was going to pass.
Yeah, it was that infamous princess ad where a kid came home and showed their mom that in school they learned a princess can marry a princess and a prince can marry a prince. And that was when we really saw the numbers turn against us. And later studies showed that it was the parents that peeled off.
Right. During that whole period of time, it was exactly parents or moms and fathers that had kids that were under 18 years old.
Yeah, so we saw that it was an emotionally effective argument. But then as we move forward, how did we break away from that emotional argument?
Yeah, and probably what is more timely to what's going on now, and what we're going to hear about more come March with the Supreme Court hearing the Prop 8 case, there was an actual trial that started all of this. And during the trial, there was evidence, expert witnesses, and people brought in to actually debunk and deal with these issues.
Well, and the court case seemed to really force the side supporting Prop 8 and against gay marriage and gay families. It really seemed to force them to defend these ideas, and I think it really fell apart in court, right?
Exactly. You don't have the same type of challenge when you have a 30-second ad during a political process. But when you go into a courtroom, you really have to be able to support with really true, immutable evidence that what supports your justification for these bans. And the court clearly came out and said, there is no evidence whatsoever to show that gay parents are any different than opposite-sex parents, and that kids are not harmed at all by being raised by the same-sex parents.
And so we saw, as opposed to the political process that was very emotionally driven, we saw the courts take a slower, more deliberative, and more fact-based approach.
Right, and I think that that's why you see so many court cases find these bans on gay marriage to be unconstitutional. And so you even see that play out in the DOMA cases. In those cases, there have been numerous Republican and conservative judges that have litigated these cases and looked at these cases and actually saw that there's no evidence whatsoever that there's any harm to children. And they too found that the Defense of Marriage Act is unconstitutional.
Well, and so once we see the courts step in with this slow process, the slow, deliberative, thoughtful process that's based in facts, that really tears apart this kind of emotional reaction that we've had in this country to gay people, starting with Anita Bryant to now. What does that do? How does that open up space for us to move forward?
Yeah, I think culturally we've seen big differences because there's more visibility over the years of gay people. We see that our neighbors, our friends, our brothers and sisters are gay, and that just changes the narrative for them. They see that they aren't harmful to children. And then you see the courts act, and what they did is they opened up the institution of marriage to gay people. And then more people got to see gay families. And we saw a cultural shift around the same time. And so you see this monumental shift happening at the same time as the courts are really putting forward and debunking these myths that we saw play out in the political process.
So since we've seen this argument, that gays are harmful to kids fall apart so much and be debunked so thoroughly in court, kind of what's happening right now, to argue for it in the Supreme Court in the DOMA cases?
Yeah, what we saw in the Supreme Court cases here are some really interesting arguments being made. The briefs were filed that support Prop 8 and DOMA recently, and what we saw in those is not as much focus on the harm to children because we saw the earlier courts kind of just break apart that myth. So they've got to now jump to different reasons and different justifications for why there should be a ban on marriage or why DOMA should stay constitutional. And that argument, one of the weirdest arguments I've seen so far, is the fact that we need marriage laws to bring stability to opposite sex couples because they have the possibility of accidentally getting pregnant. And so you need marriage to make them stable. But what that means is that gay people, they have to think about getting pregnant or having kids, and their relationships are just by definition more stable. And so you're seeing this weird argument being advanced because you don't have the harm to children type of argument to be made anymore.
Yeah, and I think this kind of chain of evidence that's been created over these court cases that you're talking about, I think it's really put us in a place where we can go to the Supreme Court finally, because we had this factual, long history through the courts, and we're having the societal change that's moving along with it, and the cultural ideas and the cultural shifts and, the narrative of gays hurting kids. And it's really going hand in hand to that we're at a point that a Supreme Court win is possible.
Yeah, and it also makes it very difficult for those that are opposed to gay rights that sit on the court, really have a hard time overcoming all this evidence that's been built up, both by trials and also by those conservative judges across the country.
Well, I think this is really important and a really great discussion. I think even discussions like this help break that narrative down and shine a light on some of the crazy things that we're hearing now and really debunk it. And I think it really moves forward. And I think the work you're doing to look at the court cases and put those facts out there, I think it's really important. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Looking at just how deeply ingrained this damaging Save Our Children narrative has become in our culture proves just how much work needs to be done in our fight for LGBT equality. The idea that our community is in any way harmful to children not only affects every issue facing us, from marriage to employment discrimination, but it also dehumanizes us and devalues our families. While we have seen fast and dramatic movement in both public opinion and political action when it comes to supporting LGBT equality, we also still see the red herring argument continuously pop up in political and cultural debates on our rights, from amicus briefs filed in the current Supreme Court cases to media segments discussing the Boy Scouts. A new report from the Political Research Associates called The Rights Marriage Message, Talking Tolerance, Marketing Inequality, reveals the impact of the Save Our Children argument used by equality opponents and how we can continue to weaken its efficacy. The report showed that during California's 2008 Prop 8 campaign and Maine's Question 1 campaign in 2009, nearly every anti-LGBT advertisement warned voters that legalizing same-sex marriage would force public schools to discuss LGBT relationships and sexual behavior with children, arguments that propelled both anti-equality ballot measures to victory. Yet in the fall of 2012, fewer than half the ads in the 4 state ballot measures featured Saved Our Kids messaging, and often only as a side note to the main theme. And all of those campaigns lost. This clearly shows that our civil rights struggle isn't just about the important fight for passing laws and pushing court cases, but also about educating our fellow Americans about our lives, our families, and our values. We must continue to point out and combat this long ago disproven narrative with our own stories of love. Only with constant vigilance, continued political and legal pressure, and perhaps most importantly, visibility, can we relegate this offensive and damaging narrative to the dustbins of history where it belongs. And that's Waymon's wrap-up. You can join our discussion and ask me questions on Twitter using the hashtag WaymonWrapUp and on our Critical Thinking Facebook page, where you can see exclusive behind-the-scenes photos and information about our show. And be sure to join us here on Gay TV on the Go for new episodes of Critical Thinking and other great shows for the LGBTQ community. As always, I'm your host, Waymon Hudson, reminding you that when it comes to LGBT politics, you can always use a little more critical thinking.